Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and folks, it's taken 2 months, but the Baltimore Orioles might finally be figuring it out. They're on a run right now. I'm recording this on Thursday. They're in the middle of their final game of the series against the Seattle Mariners. If they win it, they will have swept the Mariners. But even if they lose it, it doesn't really change the content of this episode because they've already won the series. They just swept the White Sox before that. They're going to Sacramento to play the A's here tomorrow. Three more winnable games against one of the only teams in baseball that has currently got a worse record than the Orioles. The Orioles have a chance right now to, rectify their season. At least in my opinion, they have a chance to do that. I think that's something we should talk about today because that's going to be the focus of the episode is how the Orioles have kind of restored their prestige in the last 2 weeks or so. They're winning games, they're making up ground in the playoff chase, and they're getting healthier. They're getting guys back. Those guys are making an impact, and things even look more promising as you get later into the summer, which, none of that really matters unless the team, in June and July really pulls things together and gets closer to the playoff race for the warehouse to kind of say, all right, let's reinvest in this team. I think we should talk about that as well, is if that makes sense or not. But let's lay a foundation here first. I think if you're listening to this show, you're a diehard Orioles fan. You don't need me to explain every single thing to you, but let's talk about where I'm at right now. Like I said, recording this right now in the middle of that final game against Seattle. So some of this information will be out of date by the time this episode posts on Friday morning, but I want to get it out. Anyway, so over on Baseball Reference, just looking at the Orioles schedules and results, they have won 8 of their last 10 games. That started with the second game against Boston, that doubleheader, the second game of the doubleheader on May 24th. Won the fourth game of that series against Boston, then dropped actually 2 out of 3 to the Cardinals, but then swept the White Sox, went out to the West Coast. They won the first 2 games against Seattle. In that time, they've only trimmed 1 game off of the American League East chase, but that's basically irrelevant to me. I'm going to talk about the Orioles kind of making a historic comeback in general to even, have a chance at the playoffs. But the American League East, let's not talk about that. That's probably not happening. The Yankees are going to win probably, 95 games. The Orioles are not going to get to 95 wins this year. I think right now what we're talking about the Orioles is getting to, the best case scenario is getting to like 85-ish wins. Like that's 80 to 85 wins. It's kind of like you're going to sneak into the playoffs at this rate, most likely, but that's like the best case scenario. And, I don't think it's off the table. But so let's kind of throw that off to the side. They're 13 games back in the wild card or in the AL East, but they are 24-36 overall right now, which is 12 games under 500. At the start of that run, they were 16-34. So they were 18 games under 500, only 12 games under 500 now. That's a huge improvement in only 2 weeks. A 6-game improvement is amazing. And then you look over at the playoff picture, it's early. It's early to be talking about this. They are 8 games back in the wild card, which is still quite a bit back there, but they are now ahead of the Athletics and they've stayed ahead, excuse me, and they've stayed ahead of the Chicago White Sox, 3.5 games back of the Angels. And then from there, the teams are very close to one another. And, the Orioles just took 2 out of 3 from the Angels. Obviously, they're not going to get to play them a whole lot more this year, but teams in front of them, they haven't played at all this year. The Rangers, they still have a lot more games against the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, the Rays, and they'll play the Royals. Do they play the Royals one more time, or have they already played the Royals twice? Regardless, that's the kind of teams you're talking about, is these teams that are currently right around 500. The Blue Jays, Rays, and Royals are all 32-29. The Mariners, who we're playing right now, are 32-28 and currently in the final spot of the wild card race. We're kind of catching the Mariners at a good time. They've really been struggling. They were leading the American League West for a while there. They've coughed up that lead, and the Orioles are helping them to it. But these are teams that are not great. I mean, look at the Mariners. They've got a +3 run differential. The Royals are -4. The Rays are a weird team that actually has a +46 run differential, so they should be a lot better than they are, but they are where they are. Blue Jays -9, Red Sox +13, Rangers -2. All that to say, there's a lot of mediocrity in the American League right now. So the Orioles, who have been very bad right now, if they can kind of reverse course and be the opposite of what they've been, which is, a tall task, they can catch up with these teams. We've seen the Orioles do this before, right? They had the 101 win season where they were pretty much great, a juggernaut throughout the regular season. Then last year they were phenomenal in the first half, fell apart in the second half. But, we saw that first half, they can be this buzzsaw through the rest of the league. So we know they can do it. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for the Baltimore Orioles in these next, 2 months in particular to really improve upon themselves and get themselves into a position where they can go on a run and make things interesting. So that's kind of the lay of the land right now, where the Orioles sit in the playoff picture, where they've come from. It's interesting. Tony Mansolino takes over from Brandon Hyde in early May, and it doesn't go well early on. But now the Orioles under Mansolino are 9-8. If they win today, they'll be 10-8. If they lose, they'll be 9-9. But they'll be right around a 500 team, which is great. Now, what's going on behind the scenes? I couldn't tell you. I don't have insight into what Tony Mansolino does with this team, but it feels a lot better. The games are a lot more competitive. The lineup's a lot more predictable. Jackson Holliday's at the top a lot more. The starting pitching has been a revelation, though, which I can't say that I blame Brandon Hyde for that or Tony Mansolino for the improvement on it. Mike Elias took ownership of how bad the starting pitching was. When he fired Brandon Hyde, I think that's reasonable. That is, it's obvious as well. He's the one that assembled the team and didn't get the ace, opted for more budget or, short-term deals. At the same time, Sagano's worked out all season long. Charlie Morton was horrible early. Now is picking it up. And I think that's really the focus of why they are where they are right now. I went on Fangraphs and I just sorted this by basically the start of the run. So May 24th, which actually includes that loss to the Red Sox as well. So it's not like a perfect barometer, but the Orioles, since that day, including that day, the starting pitchers have a 2.51 ERA. Phenomenal. Even if you sort it by just FIP, which, that's more of a realistic reflection of what you're doing based on your, all of the elements versus just the actual runs that have scored. They also have a 3.51 FIP and a 3.51 FIP, 3.54 XFIP. And their WAR is 1.2 FWAR, which is 8th in Major League Baseball. That is not just passable, 20th in the league. It's a top 10 rotation the last, 10, 11 days, whatever that is, which is, a remarkable turnaround. And it's something they've kind of needed because if you look at the scores of these games, the Orioles are not blowing out opponents for the most part. Wednesday they won 3-2, Tuesday 5-1, Sunday 3-2, Saturday 4-2, Friday 2-1. Lose 6-4, lose 7-4 to the Cardinals, 5-2 against the Cardinals, 5-1 against the Red Sox, 2-1 against the Red Sox. But these are all lower scoring games. These are games where you're saying, hey, offense, yeah, we need you to do a little bit of something, but you don't got to go bonkers. You don't got to score 10 runs to win, which is what the first month and a half of the season was like. If the offense doesn't score 8 runs, we're losing. And the problem was the offense wasn't scoring 8 runs. The offense was, either scoring 8 runs when the pitching would give up 7, or they were scoring no runs at all. And that's a lot of pressure to put on the bats. Now the bats were not performing. I'm not going to pretend like they have, that they were, and the pitching was totally letting them down. It was a full team collapse, but you can understand from the hitting perspective is well, we don't even have a chance. We're getting, we've got runs on us immediately. We can't routinely score 6, 7, 8 runs. We can score 4 and 5 runs with some regularity. We cannot score 6, 7, 8 runs against these pitchers. So it's, a demoralizing factor. And now you flip that, the pitching is much better. The hitting is improving as well. I looked at this the other day. The hitting has been about a league average offense for the last 11 days, which is still improvement. There's room to go, but that's prior to Cowser coming back, prior to Westberg coming back, prior to Adley getting out of his funk, which if you look at peripheral numbers, Adley's not hitting that bad. His batted ball stuff and his plate awareness and all that stuff is actually really, really good. It just hasn't been turning into hits. He gets a home run last night. Things are turning the corner there a little bit. Gunnar, you're still waiting for Gunnar to really take off. Gunner's been solid all year, still one of our better hitters, but not MVP level Gunnar that he was last year in the first half. You're kind of still waiting for that. And I think, you're starting to see these pieces come together a little bit. Cowser's back. Gunnar could take off. Adley could just hit a slightly above average hitter, which is, kind of what he's been throughout his career. He's been for a catcher really good for, the league a little bit above average. If he can get back to that, this offense is in a good spot with Westbrook coming back. And, if Gary Sanchez can be a competent backup, he's going to, replace Maverick Hanley probably in a couple days here, which I think a lot of people in the fan base are a little bit upset about. Hanley's been a nice little backup, but look at his batting stats. He can't hit at a major league level, which is, it's a tough thing to do. He does a nice job behind the plate. He does the little things in the box that you do appreciate, but ultimately they need to score more runs. And even if you lose a little bit defensively, you're probably gaining more in a healthy 100% Gary Sanchez. Now, can he be that? That fact remains to be proven. Um, but all these guys, Laureano coming back, who, I think prior to the season you would have said, who cares? But he's been really good because now we're without Mullins, we're without Mountcastle. Mullins will probably be back soon, but all these pieces are starting to come together on the offensive side to say, hey, maybe these guys can be a top 10 offense again. And maybe this pitching isn't going to be a 2.5 ERA, staff like they've been the last 11 days, but they're proving they have that kind of in their locker a little bit. Charlie Morton's, pitching a lot better. Won 2 games. Sagano looks like he's just a dude that can do this. Eflin's going to do Eflin things. Kramer looks like he's figured it out from his April issues. Who else? Cade Povich. Go look at his numbers between April and May. Yes, his ERA is worse in May, but everything else is better. He's striking out more guys, walking fewer guys. He was good last night in Seattle. A lot of things are coming together for this team that they are playing better. They are playing more like the team you thought they were going to be coming into the 2025 season. And it's exciting. It's reason to get excited. It's as we enter the time of year where if you're a basketball or hockey fan, that's over. There's really nothing besides baseball until, if you care about college football, that starts, end of August or early September for pro football. But you got June, July, August to get through. It'd be nice to have some good, fun Orioles baseball to watch. And it feels like that's what we're going towards. Now, there's a lot of time to get through because there's a lot of ground to make up, I should say. The Orioles are still, like I said, 8 games back in the wild card, 13 games back in the division, which, I think we can kind of cast that aside a little bit, focus on the wild card. But if they get the offense together, things can happen. The issue is you worry about the pitching a little bit. They're not going to be able to sustain a 2.5 ERA, but if they're a 4.5 ERA type team, I think that can work if the offense is picking things up as they should. What they need to do is, because the big thing is they're not going to have Kyle Bradish back before the deadline. They're not going to have Tyler Wells back before the deadline. They're not going to probably have, at this rate, Grayson Rodriguez back before the deadline. You hope they're getting all those guys back in August sometime. That's what it sounds like. But the Orioles, the trade deadline's coming. They need to prove in the next 2 months that, we need more. We need a trade. We need something. Maybe at that point you are, upgrading over a Kramer, or you're upgrading over a Povich because you can send Povich back to AAA. Maybe you're upgrading the bullpen because the bullpen, after being really good in April, has really been the issue this month. And even through this winning streak, the bullpen has not been fantastic. So maybe there's some ensuring to do there. But what do the Orioles need to do? And should they do it between now and the trade deadline for Mike Elias to say, like, yeah, let's go, guys. Like, let's go for it. And should they do that? So let's talk about that for a moment. We got a little less than 2 months until the trade deadline, end of July or early August. I forget what the day it is this year, but that's when it occurs. And the Orioles were a flawed team. They feel like a flawed team. They have issues. The pitching staff has issues, all these things. And I think there's an element of the fan base that would say, well, okay, we screwed up this year. We didn't go get the right pieces. Let's not double down on that. Let's not go, sell the few prospects we do have for upgrades to a flawed team. And you'd also say, well, Mike Elias didn't do that in 2022 when the Orioles were, within a puncher's chance of the playoffs. I think they finished 3 games out. They traded Jorge Lopez, who was an all-star closer that year. They traded Trey Mancini, who was, obviously a fan favorite. They did not go for it. They kind of hunkered down, did not quite make the playoffs. And I think a lot of us could rationalize that. We were coming out of the swoon that was the massive rebuild of, 2019, 2020, and 2021. I think we logically said, look, Rutschman's young, Henderson's young. There's no need for us to really sell to get this team that had even, a very dire pitching staff, I think is fair to describe them. There's no need to sell the farm to supplement this squad. So we all agreed that's fine. Then 2023 comes. They win 101 games. They do make some trades there. 2024 comes. Obviously, they trade for Burns before the season. They make some trades. They get Eflin at the deadline. The team gets to the playoffs again. And now we enter 2025. The team really flounders, and you kind of say, okay, well, is this 2022 again? Is this a flawed roster that even if we get back in the picture, does it make a lot of sense for us to trade, guys like a Dylan Beavers or guys like a Judd Fabian or, some of these secondary and tertiary prospects? I think a lot of people would say we're not going to sell Basayo for this team, but maybe Mayo's available, maybe Kerstad's available. Like, are their prospect worth's kind of been dimmed by some struggles this year. I don't know. And I think what I would say is it really depends on what it looks like by the time the deadline gets here. Obviously, you can't make all the decisions on July 31st, but I think by July, 15th, July 20th, you can kind of say, hey, I know what this team is. We're going to go for it or we're not. And that's kind of the conversations we're going to have with other GMs over the next, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it may be. And I think Mike Elias and his staff did some analyzing of this team coming into 2025 and said, this team is good enough to win 85 to 95 games, somewhere in that range. They probably had a specific number they anticipated. That's what they think they're going to be. Now, if we upgrade at the deadline and we trade for X, Y, and Z, we can make that an even better team. We can, reinforce ourselves for the playoffs and we can be good to go. And I think right now, obviously the math has changed a little bit. You've lost way more games by this point than you anticipated. Your manager is gone. How often do interim managers take a team to the playoffs and do anything with it? Like the logic isn't really there. We still will see if the Orioles name, a permanent manager in place of Mancelino, but if things are going well, it's tough to argue they should do that. But all of those things are to say like, okay, what should we do that? Well, this is the same roster you had, essentially, minus the injuries. The injuries are starting to figure themselves out. So that answers kind of one of those questions. On the coaching staff side of things, I think a lot of fans had questions about Brandon Hyde for years. It was, okay, this is the guy to get us through the rebuild, and that's great, and then we'll sign that proven veteran to kind of get us over the hump. The Orioles never did that. We saw some issues with the Orioles last year. They couldn't get over the hump in 2024, or I'm sorry, 23 or 24. I think there were some rumblings. Maybe should we make a move now? The team is kind of in a spot where they're butting their head against the wall. Maybe some new blood will kind of introduce some new ideas and get us over the top. The Orioles opted not to do that in the offseason. So now we kind of get to a part where the Orioles are forced to do it because it's, okay, hey, Mike, if you don't make that move, it's your head now. And of course, that's not what anybody wants. So you make the move at the manager position. And now maybe you're in a spot where you should have been in October or November last year, where you either have a new guy or you don't have, you've just got an empty spot, and that maybe is where you should have been all along. And so I don't think that changes the math too much. It's more about what it's more about what it looks like when you get there and what the records are and what the math is at the time. So the Orioles are right now at 24 and 36. I think when they get to the deadline, they need to be within, sneezing distance of 500. I don't know if they need to be 36 and 36 or, whatever it is at that time, 45 and 45, however many games they played. They usually go a little bit more than halfway. So probably about 45 and 45 or something like that. By then, it would be about where the 500 mark is. I don't know. They need to be at that. They need to be pretty close to it. So to do that, they've got to play at a pretty crazy rate to get there. If they're at 24 and 36 right now, and let's just say 90 games is where the deadline is, it's probably going to be more than that. But say they want to get to 45 and 45, or even 50 and 50. Let's say they want to get to 50 and 50. They got to win 26 games. So 24 plus 36. Let's do some quick maths here. 24 plus 36 is 60. They've got 40 games left to get there. So they got to win 26 out of 40. That's a 65% winning rate. You do 65% over 162 games. That's 105 wins. That would be that rate if you did it over 162 games. Are the Orioles a 105 win type of team? Probably not. They're capable of stretches of that. Obviously, they've won 8 out of the 10 games. That's 80%. That's whatever. It's 130 game win rate. So can they do it? Probably not. But can they get to 45 or 45 and 55 or 45 or 47 and 53 or something like that? Like, can they get within shouting distance to say, like, yeah, this team is like good enough. We're going to get our ace back in August. We're going to get a good number 2 in Rodriguez back in August. We're going to get bullpen help in Tyler Wells in August. Hopefully nobody else goes down. Let's supplement that so that even somebody does go down, we're good to go. I mean, I think if you're Mike Elias, you got to say, yeah, the season hasn't gone as well as I thought. But the fact that we're this close, that tells me something about my math was right. I said 85 to 90, 95 wins. We're, on pace to be more of like an 80 win team. But if I do a couple things, we're back to be an 85 win team and we're making the playoffs. And from there, who knows? We've supplemented the team. We're getting a lot better. I don't think it's, without reason to do that. But that's why we just wait and see. We've got a month and a half, a little bit more than that until the deadline. They've got games to play. If they go on some sort of Cleveland Guardians 2017 run of like 25 straight wins, or the A's in 2003 or 2002 when they won 20 straight games and they're above 500, I mean, it's all on the table. Like, no, they're not gonna sell at that point. If you're 10 games above 500 suddenly in June or July, you don't really care how they came out. The team was far worse than they were supposed to be in April and May, and they're far better than they're supposed to be in June and July. And usually, somewhere in the middle is the reality of the situation. And it would put the Orioles right in a spot where I think they probably expected to be all along at this point, was to be 5 to 10 games above 500. That's where they thought they would be. And if you get to it in May or you get to it in July, it doesn't really matter. It gets you to the same point, which is you're ahead of the trade deadline and you can make those moves. So I think anybody that says like that would be a terrible thing to happen here is they double down on these bad decisions and Mike Elias starts to, love the smell of his own, what, and he can do no wrong. And that just cements him in the position for another 5 years and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, I mean, look, I would hope he learned something in April and May to say, dude, I did not do enough on the pitching side. I probably haven't drafted enough pitching. I haven't, taken enough risks on the major league side in terms of adding pitchers. I haven't spent enough. That doesn't mean it probably means my offensive philosophy is solid. They're finally clicking. If you're getting to that point, it's because your offense is really crushing the ball. So that part probably gets cemented a little bit, and maybe some fans would be concerned about that. But you'd hope these were some hard lessons. I don't think he wanted to fire Brandon Hyde. I'm sure him and Brandon Hyde are close friends in some way, shape, or form beyond just the baseball field. That's not a thing he wanted to do. It happened because, Brandon Hyde maybe lost the locker room a little bit in certain ways, even though they haven't said that. And Mike Elias screwed up in terms of assembling a pitching staff. He didn't do enough. And that's a real thing. And you would say, all right, let's make sure that doesn't happen again, because yeah, I could fire another manager, but how often does that work out twice? Probably never. Probably never. I guess probably Brian Cashman with the Yankees. He's one of the only ones that has fired a handful of managers, still has a job. And yes, the Yankees are a perennial contender, but haven't won too many World Series since the dynasty of the 90s, early 2000s. They've won one in the last 25 years. As much as they want to talk about their number of championships, which is great, they've won one in 25 years. So it's not like they're doing that much better than many other teams that don't have the gravitas there. But I think that's kind of the math there, is that Mike Elias doesn't have to do anything right now because the calendar is what it is. The Orioles have, another 40 games probably to play with. And if they win 2/3 of them, they're going to buy. And I wouldn't even tell them they're wrong to do that. They're in the midst of Henderson's peak, Holiday's coming around. Rutschman, I think, is going to figure it out. Cowser has been really good when he's been healthy. Westbrook, you hope, is going to come back and be good. You've got this 1 year of Sagano. You've got maybe Charlie Morton figuring it out in the second half. You've got Felix Bautista, pitching well sometimes. There's just too many elements here to say like, oh yeah, this is like a season where we're like pretty good with these young guys. Nah, we'll just try again in 2026. Like, those days are over in my mind. If Mike Elias' whole thing was we're building a pipeline to never have to do a rebuild, yada, 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 it's like, okay, cool. Let's use that pipeline to make a competitive team every year. I'm not saying you sell out, do a big old sale every single year to buy as much as possible and double down on every single season. But you should have, if this pipeline is what you're talking about, you should have enough there to really reinforce your major league roster year to year. And if you're not doing that, then you better be spending money in the offseason to make these things happen with your money instead of prospects. Those are the options, Mike. That's what you told us. You want to be the Rays, you want to be the Guardians. That's great. They win a lot every year, and they make trades and they make signings, and they don't spend a ton of money, but maybe they're a little bit better than you at some of this developmental stuff, and you probably have a little bit deeper pockets than them. Let's go spend some money. Again, that's a question for ownership too. We don't know what that is specifically, but the Orioles spent money this offseason. They spent money, building up shops in the Dominican Republic and in Latin America. There's money there to be spent. So let's see it on the field as well. So yeah, I think that's just, this has really changed the math a little bit these last 10 days. Is sure, it's still a long shot. If you look at Fangraphs, they give the Orioles a 3% chance to make the playoffs. If my screen would load, which it won't on YouTube right now, but a reminder, go to youtube.com and search the Warehouse Podcast and give us a subscription if you're so interested. But there it is. It finally loaded. The Orioles they give us a 3% chance to make the playoffs, which is about doubled in the last couple of days. So things are happening here for sure. And a 0.1% chance, a 1/10% chance to win the World Series, which again, I think has probably not changed too much. But yeah, the math has changed. The Orioles are closer to what they were supposed to be. I think I pegged them. I don't think I did this in my official prediction. I think I said like 93 wins, which looking back was an insane thing to say with the pitching staff. But I think they probably thought of themselves as an 85 win team. You make some moves, you see guys excel, you get up to 90 wins. And I think right now in this current run, they're playing more like that team. They're showing their talent. They're playing teams that aren't great. The Cardinals are okay. The Red Sox are kind of falling apart. The White Sox are bad. The Mariners are in a bad way. They're playing the Athletics, who are playing poorly. Then they come home and they have a test against Detroit. They get LA for a couple, the Angels for a couple games, and they go to the Rays and the Yankees, which are good division games at the later part of the month. But that is not some juggernaut schedule, especially if you view yourselves as a playoff team, as the Orioles should have coming into the season, as they should now because they're playing a lot better. They have the talent, and they have a run here where they can really gain some ground. Again, forget about the division. Focus on the wild card. You're 8 games back. You've got 2 months to kind of prove it, to get maybe within 3 games by the deadline. And if you've gained 5 games in a month and a half, I think a lot of teams are going to be scared of you. And what's to say you can't gain those final 3 games or even becoming, the number 1 wild card spot by September? It's going to take a lot to get there, of course, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just going to take a lot of, a little bit of luck, a lot of solid play, but I don't think the Orioles are totally out of it right now. And it's exciting. And it all matters. Like, even if the Orioles don't make the playoffs, this all matters a ton. This matters for players' contracts if they can really show off in the second half of the season. It matters for the front office. If they fall apart again, Elias is probably gone. Maybe not gone. It depends again what it looks like. If they totally fall apart, though, I think Elias is probably gone. If they show some respectability, though, I think you say, hey, Brandon Hyde wasn't the right choice. I screwed up last offseason. Give me another shot. All right, Mike, you built this back up. You won, had a couple big seasons. We'll give you one more shot. It matters for the fans too. Like, look, you guys, we pay a lot of money to watch these games on Maston Plus or on your cable provider, or you listen to it on the MLB app or whatever it is. You spend a lot of money. You spend money on tickets, going to the games, concessions, parking, all that stuff. It all matters. I'm not paying to go watch a crappy product. We did that in 2018 and 2019 and 2020 and 2021. Like, we did that. It's over. We were promised consistent winning baseball. You look like you're back on the path there. Let's go for it. Let's play some ball. Let's win some games. And I'm really excited that's where we're at now. Again, it's going to be tough. It's a long road to hoe to get back to 500 and then to make the playoffs from there. But that's what Tony Mansolino said he wants to do. The talent is there for it to happen. It just needs to click, and it is starting to do that just a little bit. So that's really all I got to say about this episode. I think Jesse will be back with you early next week with a new episode. Not sure what the topic's going to be. I appreciate you guys kind of sticking with me through some probably crappy audio quality. Had to record this one kind of on the run. And for just kind of, listening to the podcast. Like I said earlier, you can subscribe to us on, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else. You can also follow us on social media at The Warehouse Pod on X and on Blue Sky. And you can subscribe to us on YouTube, The Warehouse Podcast. Just search for us. I'm sure we'll pop up. I think we've got 301 subscribers right now. Would love to make you 302. So go over there. It's totally free. You can watch these episodes, see my little head in the corner, and see my screen share about what I'm showing, the statistics and so forth. Yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Let's keep talking about some winning baseball. And yeah, we'll talk to you later. Again, this has been the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network, and we will talk to you next time.